Now, this is what I'm talking about. With the Minnesota Wild being linked in so many trade rumors, one name has been surfacing in Wild spheres recently, and that's Dylan Larkin from the Detroit Red Wings. We have to dive into that crazy possibility, plus a little bit of an update on Brock Nelson and how some recent Wild reports just make this even more likely. We want to hear your thoughts on it. We got to talk about it. There is a lot to get into on this episode of Wild Digest. Dylan Larkin's a crazy thought, Kirk, but look, before we get into it, just got to remind you guys, you have been subscribing like crazy. This used to be at 90. It's down to 87, but that's still a ton of you who are not subscribed when we have daily Minnesota Wild content all off-season long, trade rumors, reports, draft, all that good stuff. This is your home for it, and it's completely free to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Kirk, let's just dive into this first. And first things first, I want to revisit some recent quotes from different articles, different members of the media, stuff like that surrounding the Wild before we dive into this. So Anthony DeMarco said, according to the source recently, the Wild are content with their defense and goaltending outlook heading into next season. By all accounts, the Wild's focus is to bolster their forward group, specifically down the middle, which is where this video starts. And look, speaking with a source close to the situation, he's told the Wild plan to be very aggressive. Now, we've heard that as well, right? The Wild want to be extremely aggressive with whoever they go out and sign, trade for. I know we got a lot of money to spend, but with those buyouts coming off, Kaprizov's contract coming up, there's a lot of stuff, but, the Wild project to have more than $49 million of disposable money. And Kirk, the one guy I wanted to revisit right now first is Brock Nelson, and he's a name that has been surfacing more and more every single day back in these Wild circles. He's died down for a bit, but he's coming back now. Before we get into the big hitter, Larkin, it feels like with his name circulating so much, Nelson is maybe a more popular target. As much as I don't love it, what are your thoughts on Nelson's name kind of becoming more popular now?
I can't really say I'm the biggest fan of it, but I do understand the choice, the option that Brock Nelson brings. He's a seasoned veteran, played many, many years on the Islanders, then goes to a playoff run where didn't have the most success there with the Colorado Avalanche, but he's been a guy that has shown that he really is able to be in any situation possible. He's a very good fit for whatever team he goes on. He's a bit on the older side of things, which I'm sure a lot of teams don't really care about. There's some that do, but when it comes to the Wild, they're just looking for that depth. They're looking for that star power that they could bring. And at 33 years old, the center, he could be a good middle guy for a couple years. However, he's not one of my favorite options just because of the age, because of the price that they would have to give up to him. It really reminds me of a contract similar to what they would be giving Foligno, Zuccarello, if Zuccarello put up many less points than he does now. And it kind of just seems one of those middle of the road signings for me. And we know that center is a big need. And if by some means they cannot get anybody else and Brock Nelson is their only option, I'm not mad, but he wouldn't be my number one on the table at this very moment.
No, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts. You shared your thoughts on Nelson before, but now that we're circling back, after a bit of time, has your mind changed? Because honestly, for me, Kirk, it comes down to one simple thing for Nelson, and I'll just get your take on it because I think you'll probably agree. If we give him a kind of shorter term deal, fine. But my problem is knowing Nelson, knowing his age, he's eligible for a good amount of money. Some team might be willing to give him 4 or 5 years. And I don't want that team to be the Minnesota Wild. Like you said, we look at the roster right now. If we get a Zuccarello type deal around $4 million for 2 or 3 years, I know Foligno's was 4x4. Wouldn't be super upset about that because, again, you're getting extra value up front, less value, at the end of that contract. But I feel like there are other teams that are going to be pushing his market value even higher. So if the Wild really want to land him, unless he really wants to come to Minnesota, you're probably going to have to overpay. What's your limit on a term for him? That's kind of my issue. I would not be willing to give Nelson, I wouldn't say more than 3 years. And I just feel like he might find that offer elsewhere anyway.
3 years is exactly what I was thinking as well. Because when we look at the kind of contracts the Wild have right now, Marcus Foligno, Jonas Brodin, Jared Spurgeon, Matt Zuccarello, and you add Brock Nelson to that in this instance, those guys are going to be 38, 39 when those contracts expire, and they're taking up a lot of money. And we don't want the Wild to be in another situation where they're buying out these older guys who have so many years left on their contract and so much money is going to be going in dead cap. We can't be in that situation ever again. I think the Wild learned from that. So it is a bit of a risky contract, but something along the lines of 2-3 years is my maximum. But as you said, I do fully expect some other team to give him that 4 or 5 year deal. And we can only hope it's not the Minnesota Wild in this instance.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I don't know. I don't mind Nelson, but I think there are better options. And I think that's a good way to lead into this. Now, Dylan Larkin is an interesting name. Now, to preface this, it's not like we have an official Larkin to Minnesota report, but I want to bring this up because Dylan Larkin, there's been some controversy around him in Detroit right now. Of course, at the end of the season, Larkin was saying about management in his end of season presser, yeah, I wish we could have added someone heading into the deadline, sort of pseudo calling out Stevie Y, and Stevie Y responds with, hey, look at teams like St. Louis and Montreal. They didn't add anyone, and their veterans stepped up, their guys stepped up, and they made the playoffs anyway. So there's some people saying that there could be a rift drifting between Dylan Larkin and the Detroit Red Wings. Naturally, that leads to Dylan Larkin trade talks. And while Brock Nelson's a free agent, Kirk, Dylan Larkin, if ever available for trade, this can be something very interesting. But it's not just us saying this. Like, of course, we heard those Larkin reports, him talking about a trade. The Wild are in the market for a center. He seems to be fairly cost effective, all things considered. $8.7 million. He's 27 years old, and he's not a free agent until 34 at the end of this contract. But we're also seeing this. I'll link some this forum post online, but like lots of people talking about who we wanted for center. Sean Monahan, maybe that's another video if Columbus would ever want to move him. But one reply here said, seriously, Bennett free agent or Larkin trade. And look, seeing this online, seeing this in these different circles, Kirk, it's starting to convince me a little bit. Dylan Larkin's a guy I really, really like, has a long career in the NHL, 4 straight 30-goal seasons, is the captain of the Wings. He's been there his whole career. I imagine as a Wings fan, you'd never want to get rid of him. He is your guy. But if the Wings, I was 28, I think I said he was 27, whatever. But if you want to get younger, Marco Rossi, you trade him in this Dylan Larkin trade. Again, assuming Rossi gets moved. Again, we don't want it. I just want to keep reiterating that. Kirk, if this is ever a possibility, Dylan Larkin's one of those guys that if you even get a sniff that he's on the table, I say you offer as much as you can for him, because I think there's not much of a better fit for this Wild team right now.
It's not every day you get a guy like Dylan Larkin available via trade. And as you mentioned, we don't want to see Rossi traded, but if it comes down to it, and this is what we've been saying in just about every video, we've mentioned Marco Rossi. You have to get your value back or more. And the Wild would not be able to give up Dylan Larkin and, for Marco Rossi straight up. There would have to be more moving pieces in that, so maybe some contract works here and there, but Marco Rossi is certainly going to be a piece of it. That would be the biggest boost possible that you can get, at least from what we've been seeing so far in legitimate reports from, credited writers and whatnot. But when it comes to Dylan Larkin, an $8.7 million contract, that is a steal when it comes down to a guy like Dylan Larkin at 28 years old. The length of his contract he has left, with the cap going up over these next few years, this contract could look like a $5 to $6 million contract. And it may be a bit now for the Minnesota Wild when it comes down to needing to sign Kirill Kaprizov. You have Matt Boldy's contract now underway. You have many other contracts that are going to be taking effect. They're going to be acquired by the Minnesota Wild. So having a contract like this, where it is, expensive now, but when it comes down to 2 or 3 years, a guy like Dylan Larkin's skill, everything seems to be falling in the right place for the Minnesota Wild in this kind of ideology that we're talking about here now. But Dylan Larkin, as I mentioned, is a guy that I would love to see on really any team except Detroit, because Detroit's just not had the greatest seasons the past few years when they should be very, very young, but they seem to be lacking that experience. And it does seem like they're just trying to get younger, which, that's the talk for another day. But if Dylan Larkin were to be a guy that the Wild could go after, you absolutely 100% have to at least put in a conversation with the Detroit Red Wings.
100%. Like, again, he's just the perfect fit. And again, $8.7 million for what would probably be your 1C, would certainly be your 1C, is unbelievable. Solid in the face-off top, solid defensively, just kind of good all around, great locker room leader. Again, like you said, Kirk, there would be some quirks with that in terms of contracts going out, because again, making $8.7 million, if you're centering this around, again, hypothetically, a Rossi move who's, an RFA, it gets a little funky. You'd probably have to move out some of the contracts you have. Detroit would have to be willing to take those on while also giving Rossi an extension. So would not be easy. I maybe wouldn't say it's necessarily the most likely, but that's what I love about this. Some moves that the Wild make, some moves teams make, they're the most unexpected moves. They're not always likely. And with every team likely knocking on the door for Dylan Larkin, if he's available in Detroit, why not Minnesota? Again, we're talking about these free agents in Besser and Nelson and these Rossi trades for other young players. Someone like Larkin in their prime, if made available, could be perfect. But let us know your thoughts down below. What do you think about Dylan Larkin? He looks pretty good in that thumbnail, doesn't he, in that jersey? So we'd love to hear from you down below. That'll do it for this episode of Wild Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 2,000. We'd love to hit it by the end of May, and I know you guys can help us out with it. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host Kirk Day. We'll catch you in the next one.